No kid's Jewish education should end at 13. Adraba offers Ontario high school credits infused with Jewish learning online for teens across the province. Ministry approved, intellectually demanding, Jewishly transformative. Adraba.ca. That's ADRABA.ca. Your teen belongs here.
How is the masculinity crisis affecting the Jewish community? A new article raises the discussion with regards to teenage boys and bar mitzvah, and we get into it. And we also discuss the role of Kiddush clubs in shul life. Are they good for the community? Are they a symptom of something bigger? All this plus textual healing, of course. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yedida Eisenstadt and Matthew Leibel, we are not in heaven.
I'm excited to see you guys. I'm coming to you live from San Francisco, and I'm at this conference for AJAS, AJAS, the Association of Jewish Aging Services, with a couple colleagues from Simkin and Winnipeg. And we have to tell everybody here, where are you from? Winnipeg. That's in Canada. Do you know where it is? I know where Vancouver is. No. I know where Toronto is. Somewhere in the middle. Anyway, we got an award for our Friday night service.
Nice.
And picked up the award earlier this week, and it was really, really cool. So everyone's really proud back home, and we're excited to be here.
Wait, what's the award that you get for a Friday night service?
Yeah. And tell us about your award-winning Friday night service.
Is it like Best Lechadodi? Is it like
I was up for a few. I was up for Best Lechadodi. I was up for
Best Supporting Gabbai.
That's a Saturday morning award. That's not a Friday night award. I was up for, what was it? Best candle lighting, best Manischewitz bottle. What are all the, no. So there's a series of awards that this organization does every year called their Innovation Igniter Awards. They encourage, I guess, different personal care homes and facilities, and they want to hear submissions of innovative programs that you're doing to recognize them, but also to share them with other institutions because maybe they will. So by comparison, there was a couple of the other winners were an intergenerational summer camp, which was really cool.
Okay.
A program called like A Day to Remember for a place that's in hospice care, something probably close to the end of people's lives where they give them like an elaborate meal and all kind, like a big kind of like a day to remember. And ours, for our Friday night program, which we call Friday Night Lights at Home, which all the Americans laugh at because that's what they call high school football on Friday night. But I always say in Winnipeg, it's Kabbalat Shabbat. At Simkin, we had Shabbat morning locked down for a long time. But our Friday, when I started, really wasn't doing much. And so I kind of pitched this idea. Let's get everybody together in the atrium around the piano, and I'll do a musical Kabbalat Shabbat like I used to at synagogue. And they told me one rule. They said, sounds great, but bingo ends at 3, and they need a chance to recover, and dinner starts at 5. I said, well, what about like the content of the service? They said, we don't care. but bingo ends at 3, and you can't say service at 3:30. They need a chance to recover. So I said, well, what about like 4 to 4:40, 4:45? And we've been doing it. It's so well attended every week. We get 60 residents, and we only have 200 residents in the place, and only a little more than 100 are Jewish. So we've got Jewish, non-Jewish coming together, and then they go right into Friday night dinner, and it's great. I love it. I look forward to it. And then they entered this for an award without telling me, and we won. What about you guys? You got some interesting things going on.
Well, today is my daughter's 7th birthday. And even though I have an adult stepson, this is the child that, grew inside my body. And I can't believe that it's been 7 years since then. So I'm feeling nostalgic and old, and can't believe how big she is. So kind of awesome.
It's crazy because our kids are the same age.
Yeah.
And when Hugo turned 7 earlier this year, yeah, honestly, like, and then my sister just had a baby, and you see like the little tiny baby. You're like, wasn't Hugo just that little?
Right.
Like what? It makes you feel weird.
The days are long.
So weird. I feel like my mom.
The years are short. It's true.
Yes.
That's so cliche for a reason, right? Like it's just so true.
Although,
but Avi, you've got teenagers. Like you're laughing.
I do. A totally different world. Like
you're like 7. I would trade anything for a 7-year-old.
Let's make a show. Let's do this. So before we get into a topic today, I do want to acknowledge that there's a lot of terrible things happening in the world. Oh. We're not going to talk about the events in Detroit. We have thoughts, but we're going to set them aside for another time. Instead, we're going to talk about other things so that people can have other things to talk about as well. There's an article that came out in Sapir called Boyz II Mensches by Adam Teitelbaum, and it was talking about the masculinity crisis and how it relates to the Jewish community.
It's a very interesting article.
Yeah, so there's a big disengagement that we have. Males are not part of Jewish life outside of Orthodoxy. Women have, by and large, become the dominant force within non-Orthodox Jewish life. And the issue that is going on in the general population is what we're seeing in the rabbinate as well. The Atra study showed that there's a lot more women in the rabbinate than there are men, and that's basically the majority of rabbinical schools are populated by women. And like one of the things that he points out is that for a while, what was being seen as the problem was the traits of masculinity, and we can fix that by making men, in essence, more feminine and taking feminine traits and saying, men, you have to adopt a lot of this stuff. And I'm not going to get into what I consider or what people consider feminine traits versus masculine traits, but that hasn't really worked. There's a lot to talk about there. So what I want to start with is a point that I've been thinking about with this, and specifically with the idea of the rabbinate, because I am married to somebody who was a pioneer in the female rabbinate, was like, look, this is what's wrong with the rabbinate in general is X. And as long as, this masculine thing that rabbis do is fixed because women are coming into the rabbinate and they can show them how we do it and how we bring this empathy or we bring this listening quality or we bring whatever it is, then the rabbinate's going to become better. How do you see Judaism vis-a-vis these masculine and feminine energies, these traits, and what are some of the things that we're getting right and what we're getting wrong, and just in terms of what we see in the lay of the land? Yedida, I feel like you had so much to say that I go.
I was going to comment on how so very gender essentialist all of this is and all of the stereotypes therein. And having observed that, there's a reason that those stereotypes exist. And, everybody's made up differently and has different strengths and weaknesses. I wasn't involved in following when women entered the rabbinate really in any of the modern Jewish denominations, or that was intended as a corrective. I think one framing for the way that women entered spiritual leadership in the different movements is sort of following first wave, second wave, third wave feminism. And I think that that's one way to understand it.
I just know that when I grew up in the 90s, there weren't a lot of women rabbis. There weren't a lot of women involved with the shul. And by the time I started working
in Canada, more traditional.
No. By the time I was working at the Shaarei Tzedek, if I needed volunteer Torah readers, I had a roster that was 90% women, 10% men. And my Baba would often say, "How come there are no more men volunteers?" She would notice it, and she has so many more years of perspective. And I never really thought too much about it, other than we just had all these it was great that there were all these women who were getting involved in synagogue. Doesn't it feel like on one level, kind of it was a reaction to the fact that men dominated the synagogue landscape for a long time. And it was good that women were getting more responsibilities and the pendulum kind of swung. But this article makes it seem like now men have almost been displaced from the synagogue, or feel like they are, or aren't going back. And it's like a weird overcorrection in a way.
So I do think
and now we need to find a better balance.
Yes. But I think that the framing of women entering this space and becoming active in it is the reason that men have checked out is interesting and seems to be true, but also is problematic. If we're after some kind of gender equity, it can't be the case that when women reach, let's say, that 50% threshold, men are like, nope, this space isn't for us anymore, and check out. So the author is making this case that there have to be frameworks for men to check back in, but it's still working in that male framework.
I think that it's not, once the space became more than 50% female, then the men just check out. It's that the language and discussion and ideas. And I know that, yes, we are speaking primarily in a binary of male, female, masculine ideas, feminine ideas, traits. It is more complicated than that. The idea is that the once women start being a much more active part of Jewish life, then so much of it gets recast in that way. I'll give you a good example of it. When the Reform women put out a women's commentary on the Torah, right? With this idea that like, well, every commentary for the past 2,000 years has been a men's commentary. Yes, you're looking for yours on your shelf, and I see where mine is on my shelf. It's
in the living room.
There you go, right? There is a women's challah bake, but there's no men's night other than like a steak night, right? There's all this spirituality.
But there is Kiddush club.
Go ahead. Hold off on that. Right? This idea that like men started feeling like everything was being cast in the light of these women. And yes, Judaism until now was male and was male coded and had all this masculine stuff. But as soon as you start seeing all this woman stuff being in there, it's like, well, there's no space for me. There's a Miriam's cup. And I know there was an Elijah's cup.
Fragile.
Yes, 100%. I am not denying
we got to be able to talk about it. Like, we're not trying to offend anyone.
No,
we're not trying to offend anyone. And we're not sitting here being like women shouldn't or men, but I do want to pause for just a second and wonder, is this a uniquely Jewish problem?
No, not at all.
That's why I don't want to start saying that Judaism did something. I think this is a reflection of a larger society thing in general.
Absolutely.
Yes, we shouldn't be so quick to be like the article we're referring in Sapir. Adam reimagines the bar mitzvah process as being this whole long thing to kind of save young men within Judaism. But I'm kind of like, whoa. The greater society at large, men and at whole are withdrawing from civic life and religious life and social life. So this is way bigger than Judaism. Like 100%. Judaism didn't do this, and Judaism isn't responsible. It's just Judaism's feeling it the way everywhere's feeling it. So we can maybe pump the brakes on letting too many women into Judaism or something crazy like that, which I don't think we did.
Whatever the Jews do often is an echo or reflection of what's going on in the larger society. And so this phenomenon that Adam Teitelbaum is observing is 100% a larger phenomenon, but he is talking obviously about it in a Jewish context. And his diagnosis is concerning the Jewish community, and his prescription also is concerning the Jewish community. I think that the wrench in this and like the interesting test case is that it seems to be happening less in Orthodox communities. So can we go there next?
Sure.
Isn't that because Orthodox communities, I mean, you guys are in them, but it always seems that they're still more male dominated in terms of like who even counts in a minyan.
So that's my point. My question, and maybe all my feminist friends are going to come hunting for me afterwards, right? So the question of like counting women in a minyan is telling women like, great, you need to be present. You count. Everybody counts. And that's like a wonderful thing to say to young women to make them feel like their presence in shul is important. And that is something that Orthodox synagogues struggle with. And I struggle to decide that I need to be present. But the flip side of that is by women counting, then it's less important for men to show up. And what he is saying from this like very gendered perspective that still may have truth to it is men need that framework of discipline and ritual and obligation in a different way than women do.
There's an apocryphal line that I heard attributed to Rabbi Chaim Brovender, where somebody asked him why women don't count in a minyan. He's a Rosh Yeshiva in Israel, and he said, if women counted in a minyan, you know where men would be on Shabbos? They'd be out bowling. Right, which encapsulates this idea that like men need that sense of obligation and women will come anyways.
Do you think he's right? I guess it shows that he's kind of right.
You're saying this. You're saying that, yes, men need this sense, this framing and the sense of obligation, and women will naturally have this like inclination to come anyways, even if they quote unquote don't count. What's interesting is the more men count, right, as you move along the spectrum to Haredi life, women don't even check in, right? They have their own world and they're very involved in their own thing, but women don't come to shul nearly as much in the Haredi communities. Women aren't learning Torah in the same level, right? If they learn Torah, they're learning about Torah and not necessarily like getting into texts themselves. And so when you have all of this obligation, women do check out because they're like, well, I don't have to do this thing. And I was told I don't have to. So I have my own set of like things and I'm okay. I'm already perfect as it is. And all of the messages that they get. But in the modern Orthodox world, that's where I think the fulcrum and the tension is, because women are told that they count and that they're important, but there's not a lot of ritual roles for them. And so that's where you have this stuckedness.
Interesting. Is this a problem in the Orthodox communities?
I think it's a big problem in the modern Orthodox community.
Young women feeling like this tension of I'm feminist, and in every other place in my life, I am a full participant and citizen and count, and not in my spiritual context. Yes, that can be a problem. I am a person who struggles with this because in every other part of my life, I am a equal. And this is like a place where I have chosen that my shul community and the commandments of orthodoxy, modern orthodoxy, are overcome my feminism, is the way that I would frame it. And they live in tension, and I like tension. I like complexity, and I'm comfortable with that. What I was going to say is, like, I think that the test case that's really interesting for this is, and I should be very careful here. I'm not an expert on the laws and practices of the conservative movement. But I think that on the one hand, they went in an egalitarian direction, but on the other hand, they didn't obligate women equally. And so that tension exists where, like, women count, and that's great, but they're not obligated in all of the ways that men are. And so it's like another, like, complex gray area where there isn't clarity about women's roles.
I think that distinction is by and large like lost on the majority of conservative congregations at this point. My wife's congregation notwithstanding, which is its own discussion, of which there are very few of these traditional conservative congregations left. But by and large, in the vast majority of conservative congregations, women are just, for all intents and purposes, completely equal to men.
But back to the article. So let's, those are my complaints, but I can move on from them. I actually think that the rest of the article and his prescriptions are really smart. And I think that it is important, and that shuls and communities should be offering this developmental framework beyond bar mitzvah, right? Like, people stop coming to shul sometimes after bar mitzvahs. They stop their Jewish educations after bar mitzvahs. But, like, those teen years when you're becoming who you're going to be, like, that is the optimal time to be engaging and role modeling and being very involved in community.
See, this is where he lost me. Okay. Because he has this wonderful prescription, but it's very generic. It's like,
let's
get involved.
Describe the prescription.
He says that instead of if I remember right, instead of the bar mitzvah being kind of like the end, the bar mitzvah should be a little bit of study and then really just be the beginning. And then there should be a program for young men up until they're 18, really, kind of 13 to 18, where they continue to learn. They learn about tzedakah. They get into chavruta groups with other men, and they debate these issues, and they try to debate young men-centered issues, like what's expected of me when I become a boyfriend, what's expected of me when I become a husband, what's expected of me in terms of giving tzedakah, what's expected of me in standing up for other people. Like, it's a very interesting idea. I was reading it and thinking to myself, this is really cool. This will never work.
But also it should be for everybody, right?
Hold on. Exactly my point. So that's where he lost me. Because
I was like, this is such a great idea. You would in my community and in any community I've ever visited, you would never get buy-in. You would never get the parents buy-in. They've got too many other things going on. Hockey, basketball, baseball, gymnastics. They're not going to do 5 years of post-bar mitzvah listen. Whenever we did a post-bar mitzvah club.
You know where this works?
How?
Every Orthodox community.
But I don't live in the Orthodox community.
I'm just saying that is the proof that it can work, because people actually care about faith and tradition and religion, and kids go to shul, and kids learn, and kids get involved, and kids are volunteering for Jewish organizations all the time. And when they're 18, they've bought in, and we need exactly. So it absolutely does work if you care, and if it's from a top-down perspective. If the parents care, right, then the kids are going to care, and he's trying to force the communities to care in some way or another. But you're also right, Yedida, that this is so generic that we need this for girls just as much as we need this for boys.
Oh.
The only 100%, because girls are checking out after their bat mitzvahs.
Of course.
They're not becoming dysfunctional people.
I absolutely, right? First of all,
in the same
you don't have teenage daughters who listen to this show, and therefore they are all wonderful people. I'm not going to say anything wrong about them, but I see a lot of teenage girls, and so I'm not going to say anything. But I think that teenage girls absolutely need to check in this same sort of way. What I do think that we need, which he does not address, is we need the same level of engagement for both sides, for both genders and all the genders in between, but we also need spaces where genders can be gendered. And that's something that he doesn't talk about. He's just talking about this boy program, right? And saying, well, this is the gendered space. We need boys to have a space for boys. I'm like, no, we need a space where teens could be teens, but then also a place where they can understand what gender means for them.
And where we let kids be kids. But I want to like back up just a little bit. One of the themes that comes up on our show, I think relatively often, and it's definitely a drum that I'm banging, is that like there's this loneliness epidemic, and one cure for it is community. That community is really important. So he's saying also families shouldn't check out after bar mitzvahs. They need to be in community. And right, the larger loneliness epidemic and societal, larger cultural discussion, Jews are not immune to it. And his prescription really is like Torah, and he does this like lovely explanation of the Mishnah and Avot, where like there's this explanation of all the ideals of what a Jewish man should be. And it's really beautiful. And I love that teaching. But he also just talks about this idea about mutual obligation and communal responsibility. And this is also very cliche to say, American culture, and to some extent, but differently, the social contract in Canada is a little different, and there's still like mutual obligation and responsibility. But we have this focus on personal rights rather than personal obligations. In Judaism, we say, is much more about obligations. And, you know, you can mix Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and doing things for other people in there. And that's really his solution to this, is that we have to train young people, and his focus is especially on the young men, that they have obligations and responsibilities within the community. And if we focus on that, right, if we don't let them all just stay up in their bedrooms and play their guitars and play video games throughout their teen years, right, if we have them out learning to be members of a community and all of the obligations and service entailed, like, you will raise functional adults who will be contributing members of society. And I think I think that makes a lot of sense.
Sure. I want to ask this question about, like, if we go back to the thing, like, why is this happening in the larger world, not just the Jewish world? Why? Let's go to the why. Why are men withdrawing from these aspects of life at a rapid rate?
Because we've given women rights.
Is that the reason?
Women can vote and have credit cards.
Like, are you being facetious or are you being serious?
I am being a little facetious.
Right, I could tell sort of by the tone, but like, do you think like the 14-year-old boys are picking up on that?
No, I think they're being raised in it.
Intentionally or just kind of subconsciously? Like, I don't really feel like parents are messaging this sort of stuff. And I'm trying to think of like teaching 20 years of young boys, like individually. I don't see huge differences between the young men I taught in 2004 and the young men I teach in 2026. Like, I see them as having very, very similar characteristics and very similar behaviors and very similar challenges. I don't see like them being 20 years later super withdrawn and not wanting to be involved. But I know this is going on. I'm not entirely sure why. And when we figure out why, then I can start to wonder if this will solve that.
We know that social media is terrible.
Terrible. I'm never on social media. I know that. Yeah, but everyone is. So that's a problem.
So
okay.
Social media has an alienating force, and people no longer know how to socialize and go out and be in community with each other and engage in difficult conversations. And, you know, we've broken society. I think COVID had a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. Also, not everybody came back and like learned how to be with other people after COVID. I think there are a lot of sociological reasons.
But why do they hit the men differently? Why does social media seem to make men withdraw from communal life, but not women? Why did I get where you're going, but like, why is this having this negative effect on the young male community and not the female community? So
what I suspect, and this is my working hypothesis, but I'm not even sure if it's true. So all of this hedging aside, I think the social media problem is, on the one hand, the toxic masculine voices are being amplified in ways that are, because that anger and that toxicity is what the algorithms go for. And so the bad male role models are being pushed up the, algorithm, because that's where the engagement makes it work. But I think at a much more subtle level, I think the general society, which is being picked up by social media and being disseminated out there, is this message that when a woman does something, yay women, but there's no counterbalance for like yay men, because that's disgusting. Why would I champion what men have been doing this for 2,000 years, right? There's no space, right? And this is a woman-owned business. This is a business owned by people of color. This is all of these minorities are being uplifted and championed as they should be. But when you're not part of any of those, you just say to yourself, like, it's not because, women have rights now and women can vote. It's more, there's all of these moments where women are brought up or other, minorities are brought up. And when you're not one of those things, you're like, well, there's no space for me. Like, I don't have a place where I can enter something just for males. And other than like group therapy, which exists like just for men.
The sense I had, at least of my community, was that in the 50s and the 60s, the shul was like the golf club. They were men hanging out with men, and they felt like they belonged, and they didn't really go for God. Mm-hmm. They didn't really go for Torah. Like I'm talking about in a conservative, they went to hang out with other dudes. They went to be with men. And now that's not a men's space. And it's not like they're saying, oh, we don't like the women. It's like, we just wish we only had an all male space. Like, it doesn't have to be this horribly malicious, like terrible thing. Maybe it is for some people, but I think that there is something to that too. Just like men wanting to feel like safe. I'm a member of a longstanding men's like health club. And a lot of the guys, it's not like they don't want the women there as much as they like the fraternal aspect of being with guys who feel like they're brothers, and just, it's not as evil as it's often made out to be. It's like, it's a search for community.
You're not engaging in locker room tack, Rabbi?
No, like it really isn't.
To say that.
But honestly, like there's always this feeling that it is, but it's really just a bunch of dudes sitting around being goofy like I was with my buddies when I was 21. Like in university, like it's not this evil, hateful, horrible, like we just want to, it's communal. It's more pure. It's like we're always saying, find your community. This is a men's community. What's wrong with that?
And I'm not good. I actually think that gendered spaces are good. And I'm like trying to understand why I like that. I like my women only spaces. I like my time with my girls, and I think that's fine. And I encourage my husband to, go gambling with his friends twice a year, because like that's what some of the guys do. And I want him to go have fun with his friends, and I want to go to bed at 9:00. So I think that that's fine. And it's not always gambling. I think, Avi, that the phenomenon that you just described of the sort of like backlash where we're celebrating and elevating minorities and celebrating and elevating, women's accomplishments. And that is what we're seeing now is the backlash to that, and the, men, white men especially, pulling away from society. And like that's the interpretation that has been imposed on this that I think makes sense, is this withdrawal of men from society is the unintended consequence of DEI.
Diversity, equality, inclusion.
So I don't want to touch that one.
Do you think it's wrong?
Not because I don't want to, because essentially, yes, in a nutshell, you're right. In the example of like, why should I enter into this competition of whatever if I know that they are going to prioritize women or minorities in this way? Like, I have nothing to offer, and technically I can win, but I know I'm not going to, so I'm going to check out. And that's the thing that is going on in society in general. Do I necessarily think the DEI is wrong as a result of that? No. Do I think that there are mistakes that the DEI movement has made over time? 100%. And that's why I think that we can easily turn this into an entire show or four, but that's why I want to bracket it. I would say, in a nutshell, I think there's some truth there, but I think it is a lot more complex.
Okay, let me ask something then. Since Avi, as you made clear, you have teenage daughters and don't have sons, and since Yedida and I have young sons, let's take this like on a small. If we go with like maybe my argument for a second, that let's not try and fix this on a huge communal life, but let's go like small, like our families. What would you say, Yedida? What would I say, Avi? What would you say, like, as a counter, not having boys, but like when we raise our young boys, what are we worried about? what are we going to try and do differently? Because I think that you're right about social media, you're right about a lot of these things, but a lot of that, like a lot of these things, starts at home. It starts at home. It starts at what the parents are valuing and what the parents are modeling. And if you want your young men to, like, my wife and I have been talking about this since Hugo was in utero, like, how do we raise feminist sons, but also strong, healthy, in some ways masculine sons? Like, how do we do this on a more micro level?
I don't have an answer to that entirely because, like I said, I only have teenage girls,
right.
But or I only have female children. But one thing that I have noticed that is related to that, and I think that is part of the answer, is healthy interactions between boys and girls at every age and stage. And this is something that I blew my mind. And I know that every school has its own culture. I assumed that when my kids would go to a co-ed, modern Orthodox Jewish day school, that there would be like interaction between boys and girls, but in a healthy way, and that like the school would have this way to balance what's going on. It's not that there's not like there too much interaction and they're like all over each other. Boys and girls do not talk to each other, not in school, not in shul, nowhere. And this is, I mean, as they get older, there is a little bit more. But I thought my 9th grader would. I thought my 10th grader would. I thought my 6th grader would. They just don't talk. They're like, boys are smelly. That's what the 6th grader says. The 10th grader would have said something else. But like, they just don't interact with each other. And that's not healthy. And I think we need to create spaces where teenagers can understand the other genders and understand what is expected of them in that dynamic, but also then have spaces where they're alone.
I just think that parenting wise, it's really good to like articulate your intentions in front of your kids and state explicitly what the family values are. So we try to articulate like we should do this. Use the language of should and communal obligation, not as like a burden, but as we are, contributing members of a community. Being in community means paying it forward and giving and building. And we try to, bring the kids into that, whether it's, feeding the neighbor's cat or going to Minion when they need somebody. And final thing, this article, reading it, like, made me think that I married really well. And I think that the model of discipline, strength, creative purpose, and service to something beyond the self are models both for men and women in Judaism. But as we see that young men are drifting, like, let's bring them back and model that for them, especially.
So that's about as good a place as any to transition to our second topic, which is to talk about the phenomenon of Kiddush clubs, which, if you ask Yedida, is very much a masculine space. And if you ask me, there have been plenty of Kiddush clubs that I've been part of that have had women.
I've been to Kiddush clubs, Avi.
Yeah, so okay. So hold on. So
what's a Kiddush club, Avi?
Oh, I want to give me a second. Okay, so I do want to preface this by saying that I have been actively part of a Kiddush club whenever I see it in a shul, and it has been, several of the past shuls that I've been part of and have gone to have had a Kiddush club, and I do not shy away from them. I see the flaws, I see the benefits. Some of the most long-standing Not in Heaven podcast listeners are members of Kiddush clubs that I have attended, past and present. You guys all know who you are, exactly who I'm talking about. What is a Kiddush club? And what to do about it is, I think, something that is actually worthy of discussion. There's an academic article about it, and that's kind of what prompted us to put it on one of our topic lists. A Kiddush club is a moment that started probably, the phenomenon started about 20, 25 years ago as a very ad hoc, impromptu sort of thing that like, davening's getting a little too long. A bunch of guys are going to go get a quick nip at the Kiddush where they'll like grab one of the bottles early and like grab a quick shot, maybe have a cracker or a piece of herring or whatever else is at the Kiddush, and then sneak back upstairs and be gone for 5-10 minutes. That has become something much more elaborate in some communities where the finer the brown liquor that you are imbibing, the better. People are bringing bottles that are hundreds of dollars, and they're making elaborate spreads with cholent and kugels and all sorts of delicacies.
For a second,
and taking longer and longer and longer in that time, and sometimes coming back to shul fairly inebriated, sometimes coming back to shul not at all, and just transitioning right into Kiddush proper. So, and that's that.
So
Matthew.
When I was many years ago in 2012, I was still in my Shared Zedek days. We were visiting Lexington, Kentucky, where a friend was getting married, and we went to synagogue on the Saturday morning. And after the service, they invited us as guests into a back room, and we all did a shot. And one of the guys who I was with, who was really involved at the shul back in Winnipeg, brought this custom back to Winnipeg. And ever since, they've had their L'chaim club. But it's everybody gets together for a shot after the service, which is what I thought.
This is not that.
So you're telling me that you're ducking out in the middle of shul, going down to a secret room in the basement, inviting only some of the people, getting smashed, and then either going back up or not up at all?
Smashed is an overstatement.
Okay, but is it a 5-second thing, or is it a 5-minute thing, or is it a 50-minute thing? Like, how long is Kiddush club? I'll tell you right now, if I was the rabbi at a shul and I found out this was going on, I would either leave the shul or I would kill the club. I find this whole thing completely disgusting. You go to shul, you go to the bar to drink.
What would you do if this happened? The shul that I was the interim rabbi at for a while in Montreal had a Kiddush club in the front row of the sanctuary. Like during Torah reading, they pulled out a bottle every week, right? And then started passing shots at each other.
Hold on. Ashkenazi or Sephardi? Because the article says that that's culturally acceptable there.
Yeah.
You know what, though? That's more inclusive than everybody sneaking out the back. I'd rather have everybody doing a shot in the first row than in a back room basement or something like that.
Okay, so I'm going to start then back at you, Matthew, with the argument for a Kiddush club. Okay, if you are at shul on time, which many people are, and that's 8:45, and you're at a shul where davening takes 3 hours, which is not unheard of in one of these many large establishment shuls, which is not good, right? You sometimes need a break. And so if you need a break, and the logical space to have that break, if you actually pay attention to what's going on and you're not just there to socialize, is after Torah reading, because the Haftorah is like, and then that leads into like putting away the Torah and going into the sermon, and people see those as like, how important is that? How important is that not? Like whatever. So if you can take 5 to 10 minutes of that time and duck out, have a quick something pick you up, right? That will get you through Musaf, get you to the Kiddush. And as long as it's done in a respectful, relatively brief manner, in a way that is inclusive, and it's not we're cutting people out. It depends on the congregation, and it depends on, like I said, every Kiddush club is different, and some of them insist on that, and some of them insist on leaving for the drasha because they don't want to miss davening. I'm not going to get into what the specifics of any specific one is, but like if that's what the purpose of Kiddush club is, and again, it's not being exclusive, it's just inclusive to anybody who knows about it and saying, we're not keeping this a secret, but hey, come have a l'chaim, and that's that, then like, I don't see the problem with it. Because it's social, it gives you an opportunity to like duck out at a time where it's relatively low stakes, having some quick drink, making a Kiddush, and having something there to get you through to the end of like the davening.
Okay, so what you just described is like the Platonic ideal of everything that is in the yes, this is fine column, even though I don't fully agree with it, because I actually think that the words of the prophets actually speak to our soul, and we as a people need to be listening to them right now. So they shouldn't be discounted. Let us assume, just if we were okay with everything that you just said, that seems not to be the reality of Kiddush clubs. So
agreed.
There are a lot of other realities in Kiddush clubs. So many of them depending on the community, right? So Michal Shaul in her article, she really pinpoints, and I think this is really interesting, that it's really a microcosm of what's going on in the rest of the community. The Kiddush club takes on the character of the larger community. So if it's a community where there are different cliques, then those different cliques or cliques, I think, as we say in Canada, have their own Kiddush clubs. So they're not like all inclusive spaces unless the community is really like an all inclusive community. So they manifest sort of like as a mirror of the larger community. So the reality isn't the Platonic ideal, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
The problem for me with the whole like this is more of an Orthodox phenomenon, right? Where the services are longer and right. The
I think it exists to a certain extent in conservative congregations as well that has bled over, but it does not exist in Reform or Reconstructionist or Renewal or like things like that where
the
people are
services
there
are shorter.
because shorter and a lot more communal and a lot more inclusive.
Like to me, if you're going to tell me that you need a break because the service is too long, my answer to you is going to be you need to make the service not so long.
Or bring a book.
Like, it's never going to work for me, this argument. Well, like, I got here at 8:45. It's just like, well, then don't go. Like, Kiddush club shouldn't be, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it'll ever make sense to me. You want to do a shot after the service, that's part of it, like a l'chaim, that's great, but you're leaving in the middle? I thought you went because you wanted to go and do it.
I think another important insight here is like, why do people go to shul and what function is the shul serving? So obviously shuls are for davening, and shuls also serve this other function of being, community social hubs.
But not when the davening is going on. You want to have a gathering at the shul where it's a Kiddush club, have a gathering at the shul, it's a Kiddush club. You want to have davening. And like, if you don't like the service, change the service. I
think this points to, again, the nature of the Kiddush club vis-a-vis the community. So I think you're 100% right, Yedida, that what the article is pointing out is that the Kiddush club is a reflection and a microcosm of the larger society, where this specific Kiddush club is emerging. And in that sense, I would say that the community is the problem, and the cliquishness of the community and the problems in the community are the problems and not the Kiddush club per se. And then the flip side of that is to say that when in a lot of these Orthodox spaces, you're in shul a lot, all the time, to the point that you feel comfortable enough to walk in and out of shul because you know that you've done your davening, you know that you've walked, there's enough familiarity. It's like you belong, right? The same way that like you've been in large congregations, Matthew, and as the rabbi, you've walked out of shul sometimes because it's your space and you know it. And you know there's a lot of people that would not feel comfortable walking out because they're like, no, it's sacred. We have to be here for the whole thing. Sure. And so in an Orthodox shul where a lot more people feel they have ownership over the space and over the service, they feel just as comfortable walking out because like, I don't mind walking out. I know when I'm allowed to walk out. I know that I've done my davening and I know that it's being disrespectful, but in a minor way and not in a bigger way. And like
only a little disrespectful.
Only a little. That's what they're saying. Is like, look, I have to trade it off, and I'd rather be a little disrespectful than not come at all. And I don't want to lose my desire to come to shul, and so I'm going to take 5 minutes or 15 minutes out of this thing and be able to do it in this way. And in that sense, like, I think whatever problems one sees in the Kiddush club, I think you have to ask yourself, how do you fix the bigger issue? And I think, yes, in some shuls, you have to make the davening shorter. And you have to, that's the way to get rid of the Kiddush club, is to say, great, we're going to make it compelling from beginning to end to the point where you should want to stay in and be part of this. The issue of the cliquishness and the getting people drunk that's the issue of the community. Stop being so cliquish, stop valorizing alcohol to the point that you need to have a half a bottle of it by the time Shabbos is done. That's a problem there, but that has nothing to do with the Kiddush club per se.
Is it true that the OU banned them? Tried to?
You can't really ban something if people are doing it, quote unquote, surreptitiously and under the radar and quote unquote illegally anyways.
But did someone come out and try and say something and like give a little slap down?
Years ago, they did have a big campaign against Kiddush clubs, but I think part of it was the negative parts of the Kiddush club, which was the getting really drunk and spending a ton of money on the alcohol part of it.
Yeah, like obviously, I think we all agree that if these things get out of hand, you can't defend it. Like if you've got people
Correct.
taking way too long a break and coming back and you can smell the booze on their breath and they're slurring words and stumbling, like then we've got a big problem. But you're saying that on the ideal level, or on the like the reason how it was conceived, that it's just like it's much more innocent. It's just a little break. It's in a space where they feel comfortable. It's 5-10 minutes out of 3 hours. I understand, but even still, that to me is just so weird.
Yeah.
So weird.
My favorite.
Can we have a video game break? Oh, I guess if you're in an Orthodox show, you're not going to be playing on Shabbos.
There you go.
Like,
there you go.
What else could you do that would be a break that would be like allowed? I don't know.
Well, the rabbi would want you to say, well, we're going to have a Torah break and we're going to go learn Torah outside.
Break from the shul to go study Torah somewhere else.
My favorite anecdote about this is there's a very, very large modern Orthodox congregation in Englewood, New Jersey. And I have family that davens there. And whenever I visit the family, I go to shul on Shabbos and they have a Kiddush club there. But it's because it's such a big shul and they have like 5 very large minyanim happening at any point in time that on Shabbos morning. There's the main sanctuary, there's the auxiliary, there's the teen minyan, there's the Sephardi minyan. And so they have like this room that became the Kiddush club room. And people show up and go, but like who pays for it? It's usually like, especially in a small Kiddush club, it's kind of loose. Like everybody knows every few months you got to either bring a bottle or bring some money or PayPal the guy or whatever. So they actually have printed up cards with QR codes on them that you can take home because people weren't paying into the Kiddush club fund. And they were like, so they started with 1 week, with several weeks, they would shame people by putting out lists of names on the tables of saying these people paid for Kiddush club for the past few months and for the coming few months. So if you see somebody that's not on this list, right, that's in the room drinking, you should tell them something. And they proactively went and started making little cards, like business cards that you could like put in your tallis bag with a QR code so that after Shabbos you could like pay in.
I do think one interesting piece of this is like when the rabbi is anti-Kiddush club, but the shul ignores the rabbi's, like it gets into this, like also it's like a microcosm of the like complicated relationship and dynamics between members of the shul and rabbis and like pre-existing customs if there's a new rabbi who comes in and isn't into it. And so what was interesting about the OU, I think it was in 2005, is like 65 rabbis or something got together, right? Like they had power in numbers, like they were all coming out against it. And it like, I don't know, it harks back to, centuries old efforts of like rabbis getting together to try to like end a practice that they're not fans of. And like, I think this is not a new problem.
What about a clergy Kiddush club? Would the congregation like it if I said, you know what, guys, while Mr. Moish is coming up to do the Haftorah, the cantor and I are actually going behind the bima to do a couple of shots and have some herring. See you in a few. I
got to say that the Haftorah was probably the only time that I would be able to like leave the sanctuary.
Someone worked hard to do that Haftorah.
Yeah.
Someone worked hard.
I know. I'm just saying that if I had to walk out, that'd probably be usually one of the only times that I could. Let's move on to some textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Yedida, what do you got for us?
So here we are, Sefer Vayikra. And this week's Parsha is the first 5 chapters of Vayikra. And chapter by chapter, we go through different kinds of sacrifices. This is more interesting and less interesting to some people, depending on who you are. So I'm hoping over the next few weeks to like give some sort of like interesting framing Torah to help people make it more meaningful. So I first want to say that all of Vayikra operates in this meaningful symbolic system that mostly doesn't have meaning to us anymore, right? Like it does have an inner logic, and it's important to identify that. So we don't bring sacrifices anymore. We don't know when to bring sacrifices anymore. So it's like, this is not a thing that we do anymore that I'll say speaks to me. But one way that I have learned to connect to it and make sense to it is that what the Torah is trying to do in Vayikra is keep God present, right? Like, what are the mechanisms by which we can serve God and keep God in our midst, right? God dwelling amongst Bnei Israel. And in chapters 4 and 5 of Vayikra, there are instructions for the sacrifices that one brings if one sins. And so in this system, sin generates a kind of pollution, and that pollution drives God away. And so the reasons that one brings sacrifices are basically to like cleanse. The technical term is to expiate that sin, cleanse from it, the chatat. And when you expiate that sin, right, you've cleansed it, you've made the reparation for it, and that is what allows God to stay present. And that also explains later what's going on in chapter 16 with all of the expiation and blood spattering and sprinkling around Yom Kippur. So this only works for inadvertent sin. If you intentionally sin, the chatat will not fix it for you. And I think that this also is a way of thinking about communal obligation in that, right, other people's sins pollute the holy, and we are all responsible for maintaining a communal level of cleanliness. And I think this is like a way to think of, like, we've been talking a lot today about communal obligation and how we can support each other, and that is an ideal way of being an adult Jew. And like, you know, I think that there's resonances here as well.
For my thought, I agree with you totally that it's so hard, especially when you're teaching Vayikra Parshiot or this Parsha to a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah student. The idea of offerings or sacrifices is so difficult to connect with them. And I just had a bar mitzvah student who did this Parsha, and he did it as Havdalah last weekend. And when we were talking, I said to him, one of the teachings I love about this, and it's funny, I found a YouTube clip online where Avi's wife, Rachel, was talking about this exact teaching. The word for offering is korban. And within the word korban is the word karov, which means close or near. And it's the reminder that people brought offerings and sacrifices as a way of getting close to God. We don't do that now. And I would say to the students, what do we do now? Well, we pray. The temple's been gone 2,000 years. We replaced korbanot with tefillah, with prayer. But the idea is still the same, the karov, the being close to God. And then I asked these students, or I asked my student, when you think of like getting close to God, that's hard for a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old. It's hard for an adult. I think there's this trend, especially in society, that you find God on an individual level. Like when I think of like contemporaries of mine, I say, you're searching for God. There's always this idea that you're alone in nature, or you're meditating, or it's yoga. Like it's some kind of private exercise where you have to block out all the other distractions. And this is how you get karov. This is how you get close to God. But no. Judaism's prescription is you can't really do a full prayer service by yourself. You can daven, but you can't do the Kaddish. You can't read Torah. There's certain things you can't do. The communal aspect, the minyan, is essential for Jewish prayer, which means that in order to get close to God, you have to be surrounded and close to community. And I always kind of like this idea that it's not some, like we pray as a we, anachnu, right? Eloheinu. Like everything, every tefillah pretty much, except for the very first modani, everything else is us or we. And that you can find an individual space within there, but in order to connect and get close to God, you need to be surrounded by other people all on the same kind of mission, this community. And I like that kind of wisdom.
All I want to highlight for this Parsha, in light of all the stuff that we've discussed, is to emphasize by Yedida, by like how much you're saying that like this is not a system that we're used to, is that so much of what we do, we cannot map onto what's going on in the Mishkan. Right? The Mishkan was, or all the sacrifices were male operated, but this was not a gendered space in that men and women walked in and out of the courtyard of the temple or the Mishkan freely. Women were just as able or obligated to offer sacrifices as men were. So the genderedness of that was removed. The ritualistic part of it, the idea of the like davening takes hours and hours and we have to like go through all these prayers, that was not it, because sacrifices did not take a long time. You wanted to offer a sacrifice, it was over and done within like 10 minutes, right? I think about the amount of choreography that it takes to go through davening today, and there was a very ritualized choreography for all of these sacrifices, but it was done in a few minutes, and you gave a prayer, you did this thing, and it was done. And I was like, oh, there is no space in the Mishkan for a Kiddush club. because it's just as it's communal, it's individual, everybody's there, nobody's there, we're all doing this. And it shows how different that whole world is, that we don't really we talk about our synagogues as being like small temples, and we are recreating the sacrifice service at Shachrit, at Mincha, at Mariv, all of this stuff, but it's not true. It's not there. It's as you say, a completely different world, and what we have is so different that it requires its own set of things, but we still can learn the idea of ritualization, the idea of this choreography, and the idea of needing to be real about these things from Sefer Vayikra, and more to come about that as we go through the book. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.